The room went quiet when Ambassador Ilya stepped through the pressure gate with me at her shoulder. I remember the sound first. Not applause, not conversation, just the soft hydraulic seal of the embassy lock closing behind us, and then the delicate clink of crystal feeding bowls somewhere across the reception hall. The kind of tiny sound you only hear when dozens of powerful people stop moving at once. I stayed half a pace behind her, exactly where protocol put me. That was the first thing they saw wrong. Not my face, not my height, position. A human bodyguard was already an insult in that room. Standing close enough to shield her without being told made it worse. The Hall of Concord Annex 3 had been designed by a species that feared edges. Nothing in it was straight. The walls curved like polished bone. Light traveled through translucent veins in the ceiling, glowing a pale blue-white that made every glass surface look colder than ice. The air smelled faintly metallic, filtered too clean, with a sweet resin note from the ceremonial braziers near the dais. Ambassador Ilya moved through it as if she belonged to the architecture. She was Veari, tall, silver-skinned, every gesture measured down to the angle of her wrists. The membranes at her throat caught the overhead light when she turned, flashing pearl and lavender. Her formal mantle fell in layered folds from her shoulders, heavy with woven rank filaments that marked her office. She did not rush. Diplomats who rushed gave away fear. I carried fear for a living, so she did not have to. My suit looked simple beside all that alien pageantry. Matte black field jacket, clean seams, ceramic lining under the cloth, no visible weapon larger than the sidearm locked at my lower back. Human tailoring offended them too. Too practical, too honest about purpose. I could feel the eyes on me. Triarch delegates, merchant envoys, security chiefs pretending not to be security chiefs, representatives from low-gravity worlds with bones like spun glass and hands too long for Earth-built furniture. They watched me the way people watch a machine they were told is safe, but would rather not test. Ilya did not look back at me. She never did in public. That was part of the arrangement. Trust that didn't need display. Steady pace, she said softly, not moving her lips. Her language had a musical rise to it, almost too gentle for command. The translator in my ear rendered it in a flat whisper. "I'm here," I answered. That was all. At the far end of the chamber, beneath a suspended map of disputed shipping lanes, waited Minister Cell Varen of the Taith Compact. Thin even by his species standards. Gray skin stretched close over a narrow skull. Gold data rings nested in both ears. He wore formal white, which in politics usually meant one of two things, confidence or theater. Maybe both. He spread all four hands in greeting as we approached. "Ambassador Ilya," he said, voice smooth as polished stone. "Concord receives you with relief." "Relief," she repeated, offering the smallest possible diplomatic smile. "How fortunate." A few nearby aides shifted at that. They heard the cut beneath the silk. I kept my eyes moving. Doorways, elevated balconies, catering drones, reflection lines in the long mirrored wall to the left. The room's security package was visible if you knew where to look. Recessed sentry lenses, pulse suppressors hidden in sculpture alcoves, pressure-sensitive floor tracers under the central aisle. High grade. Expensive. The kind installed when nobody trusted anybody enough to say it aloud. Selvaren's upper right hand gestured toward me. "And this," he said, "is the Terran. Not my name. Just my species, flattened into a curiosity." Ilya let half a beat pass before answering. "This is Lieutenant Adam Vale, attached to my office under lawful bilateral charter." The correction landed where she intended. Lawful. Bilateral. Charter. Every word a document. Selvaren's black eyes settled on me with open interest. "Unusual," he said. "You travel with close protection from a frontier species." The chamber liked to pretend it was open. A ring of transparent alloy arched overhead, showing a spill of stars and the pale curve of the station's docking spine. But the air inside carried the filtered chill of machinery, dry and scentless, too clean to trust. Light ran in thin white veins under the floor. Every sound came back softened. The brush of fabric, the faint hum of field emitters, the tiny metallic tick from the ceremonial chains hanging off a trade delegate's sleeve. "Unusual," Selvarin had said. "You travel with close protection from a frontier species." The words stayed in the room like static. Lyra Vey did not answer at once. That was part of why she survived rooms like this. She understood the use of silence. Under the silver fall of the chamber lights, she looked almost carved from frost. Narrow shoulders, steady mouth, diplomatic white layered with dark blue at the collar. Each seemed carrying the exact weight of office. One hand rested near the data slate at her side. Not clutching. Never clutching. Elias Ward stood half a step behind her left shoulder. Where protocol placed him and instinct improved him. Black formal jacket, no visible sidearm. Station-issued pass tab catching a cold line of light. To most of the room, he looked underdressed for danger. To the room's security grid, he looked harmless enough. That was useful. It is lawful, Lyra Vey said. Her voice came smooth, quiet, too controlled to count as defensive, and increasingly practical. A few delegates exchanged glances across the crescent table. Not hostile. Not yet. Curious in the way predators could be curious about weather. Miss Reed During gave a small clicking laugh from 3 seats down, mandibles folding and unfolding with jeweled precision. Practical for what? Terrans are famous for improvisation, not restraint. The line drew scattered amusement. Just enough to test the water. Elias did not move. That, too, became part of the test. Some species read stillness as obedience. Others read it as stupidity. Humans had a bad habit of being mistaken for whichever version made people comfortable. Smiles at, broad-frilled and lacquered in ceremonial amber, tipped her head toward him. I had thought your people hired machines for this work, she said to Lyra Vey. Machines don't misunderstand etiquette. The station also uses machines to open doors, Lyra Vey replied. I still prefer people for decisions. That earned one real laugh, warmer than the others. A point scored. A point noticed. Selvaren's black eyes did not leave Elias. Then perhaps your Terran can make one now. The open air under summit is a delicate forum. Frontier reflexes can become diplomatic liabilities. There it was. Not an insult. Worse. A classification. The room watched for the answer from the wrong person. Elias could feel it happen. The invisible turn, the social lens narrowing until he was no longer furniture but specimen. He kept his breathing even. The chamber's atmosphere sat a fraction lower than Earth normal. Most species here found dense oxygen unpleasant. For him it felt like a mountain town. Easy. The floor plating under his shoes gave a faint flex each time someone heavier shifted weight. Low gravity compensation. Expensive engineering. Clean lines. Too many blind corners near the service arch, too many ways to trap a diplomat without ever drawing a weapon. Lyra Vey knew the room was needling him. She also knew why. What she did not know, what no one had bothered to tell her in useful terms, was why Terrans from places like his were assigned to jobs like this in the first place. Lieutenant Ward, she said. She did not turn. She did not have to. The title itself was a decision. The room sharpened. Do you understand the station's non-contact code? Selvaren asked before Lyra Vey could continue. A trap dressed as courtesy. If Elias answered too bluntly, he would look uncultured. Too carefully, and he would look coached. Either way, the point would hold. Human, managed only by supervision. I do, Elias said. Miss Reed During leaned forward. And if one of us forgot that your kind favors proximity? Crystal stemware made a softer sound than blades, but in that hall it carried the same warning. I felt it before I sat down. The banquet chamber had been warmed on purpose, a few degrees higher than the transit rooms, enough to loosen most species into a false ease. Amber light floated through layered glass panels overhead. The stars were still visible, but blurred now by decorative vapor and slow ribbons of projected color. Music moved under the conversation in careful pulses, almost beneath hearing. Every detail said peace. Every placement said calculation. My chair had been set at the lower curve of the diplomatic crescent. Not at the head. Not quite among equals either. A courtesy seat. An instructive seat. Across the table, Smiles lifted a long-fingered hand and welcomed me with a smile so polished it looked inherited. To my right sat open air under, wrapped in pale membrane cloth that whispered every time they breathed. Farther down, cold arrival watched with lidless patience, one black eye reflecting the entire table like a convex mirror. Miss Reed During remained close enough to the center to signal influence, without carrying the burden of appearing responsible for the evening. Behind my chair, Elias Ward said nothing. That silence had become its own object in the room. A servant drone drifted past and poured something silver into my glass. I did not drink it. Neither did Elias ask me not to. I could feel him there instead, a stillness at my back more precise than any machine in the station. Smiles that began with weather, station traffic, tariff drift, docking delays in the western spindle. Small, polished subjects, each one laid down like velvet over wire. I answered in kind. Mild tone. Exact language. No wasted reaction. If they wanted to measure whether I was provincial, emotional, or easily cornered, I would make them work for each conclusion. Open air under tilted their head toward me. Your coalition moves quickly for a system newly admitted to central negotiation. A harmless sentence, if heard by a child. A territorial one, if heard by anyone else. I set my utensils down with care. Speed is relative. Some governments require a generation to decide what a frontier hospital can decide in one bad winter. A pause followed. Short, clean, not long enough to offend, long enough to land. Miss Reed during gave a low sound that might have been amusement. Frontier cultures often mistake improvisation for wisdom. And central cultures, I said, sometimes mistake delay for stability. Glass touched glass somewhere down the line. The music continued. No one laughed. That told me I had struck the right depth. A plate arrived carrying translucent slices of something marine and luminous, arranged over crushed blue ice. Beautiful, untouched, after a glance from Elias in the reflection of my spoon. Barely emotion, just a set of the eyes. That was all. I moved the food around enough to look polite. Cold arrival leaned forward, their voice dry as paper. Your escort has admirable discipline. Most frontier protectors advertise strength the way young predators display teeth. There it was again. Not a direct insult. Worse, an invitation. If I defended Elias too quickly, I would confirm their obsession with him. If I failed to answer, I would concede the comparison. I folded my napkin once before speaking. The secure don't need theater. Smiles that looked past me then, not fully turning, only enough to acknowledge the man standing behind my chair. And yet theater has uses. It can reassure a room. The words were for Elias. The pressure was for me. I let my expression soften by a fraction. Then I'm glad my delegation brought competence instead. That earned the first real reaction of the evening. Open air unders membranes gave a faint shiver. Miss Reed during smile thinned. Cold arrivals reflected I narrowed by less than a grain of rice. The courses changed. Hotter food. Dark sauces. A carved fruit that released a perfume like pine and metal. Servants moved in loops around us, soundless except for the tiny magnetic clicks of their trays docking and releasing. Steam climbed from the dark glaze in slow ribbons, carrying that sharp pine and metal scent higher each time a server passed behind my chair. It should have felt domestic, civilized. Instead, the air in the hall had tightened by half an inch. Not because of what Elias had said, because they had noticed he had not looked away when he said it. The table curved in a crescent of white mineral glass, lit from beneath so every cup threw a pale halo over careful hands. Open air under sat 3 places to my right, draped in layered silver mesh that shifted color when they breathed. Cold arrival remained at the head, motionless except for the minute contractions around the reflective eye that marked amusement, irritation, or calculation, depending on the angle. Miss Reed during had taken ownership of the silence the way some people took ownership of territory. That was dangerous. People who enjoyed silence usually enjoyed what came after it. A new course arrived. Thin strips of sea-grown protein folded over black root paste, each piece pinned with a needle of translucent salt. The magnetic trays kissed the table and lifted away. No one reached for the food until cold arrival did. Protocol always ate first. Then open air under let out a soft ripple through their throat membranes and said, almost lazily, competence is an admirable thing in hired protection. Though, of course, one hopes not to require the more primitive forms of it. The remark drew a polite scatter of amusement. Not laughter. The kind of sound people make when they want to be seen agreeing. I touched the stem of my glass and let the chill run into my fingers. In my experience, I said, the primitive forms are usually what save the sophisticated ones. Open air underturned their face toward me, all elegance and soft weaponry. A diplomatic answer. No, I said. A practical one. This time the amusement sharpened. Miss Reed during leaned back, one hand draped over the arm of the chair, and finally chose a direction for the conversation. Practicality, they said, is a trait common to species raised in unfavorable ecologies. Harsh gravity, excess radiation, native predators, toxin burdens, a long list of evolutionary humiliations. Their gaze moved over the table, inviting consensus. They got it. One delegate from the outer reef colonies clicked their mandibles in agreement. Another, wrapped in ceremonial fibers dyed a deep mineral blue, inclined their head and added, "The civilizations that emerge from such worlds are rarely subtle. Survival demands overcorrection." "Overbuilt bodies," said open air under. "Overreactive instincts," said the blue fiber delegate. "Overvaluation of force," Miss Reed during finished. Their eyes drifted, not accidentally, toward Elias. He was standing where he had been standing all evening. One step behind and left of my chair, hands loose, posture unforced, expression unreadable. He had become part of the architecture in the way truly competent guards often did. People stopped seeing him until they wanted to. That was exactly when they became most dangerous to themselves. I set down my glass. "You speak as if adversity produces only ugliness." "It often does," Miss Reed during said. "Nature is not sentimental." Cold arrival finally spoke, their voice low enough that the room leaned toward it. "Nor is diplomacy. We are discussing patterns, Lyra Vey, not exceptions." Patterns. Such a clean word for prejudice. The server placed a bowl beside me, and the broth inside gave off a faint silver shimmer, heat rolling across my face. Elias shifted just enough for me to catch the movement in the reflection of my spoon. Not alarm. Attention. He had heard the change too. Open air under rested, both hands on the table. "Surely your own records bear it out. Worlds categorized as high-risk breeding environments produce citizens more prone to territoriality, blunt social behavior, and displays of unnecessary courage." A few smiles followed that. "Unnecessary courage," I repeated. "A charming defect," they said. The reef delegate made a wet chuffing sound that passed for laughter, particularly among mammalian species. Teeth, forward vision, pack responses. The laughter did not spread far. It touched the polished table, the suspended lights, the silver rims of untouched cups, and died there, thin as static. I let my fingers rest against the stem of my glass and counted one breath before answering. "Then I should be grateful," I said. "I have always preferred courage to polish." That earned a few restrained glances. Not approval, not quite disapproval either. Just the careful look officials gave anything that might become useful later. Across the room, Elias Ward did not move. He stood exactly where protocol had placed him, half a step behind my right shoulder, hands loose, jacket plain, expression unreadable. Decorative, if one wanted to be cruel about it. Human, if one wanted to be careless. The reef delegate's throat sac fluttered once. A sentiment expected from a representative of a frontier-aligned bloc. "I represent treaty interests," I said. "You represent a fragile voting margin," said the one seated 2 places down from them. That voice changed the temperature more than the insult had. Until then, the exchange had still worn the silk gloves of dinner conversation. That sentence removed them. I turned slightly and found the speaker. Narrow skull, mineral gray skin, a mouth built more for precision than warmth. Miss Reed During, senior procedural strategist for the opposition caucus. He had said almost nothing all evening, which now struck me as planning rather than restraint. The server beside the wall chimed softly. Miss Reed During rose with practiced ease. "Ambassador," he said, "a brief clarification has arisen regarding corridor access and escort limits for tomorrow's closed session. If you would grant us 3 minutes in the annex chamber, we can resolve it without burdening the full table." The wording was too neat, too public to refuse cleanly. I glanced toward the presiding clerk at the far end. No rescue there. The clerk had already lowered their eyes to their slate. Deliberate blindness. Purchased or pressured, I could not yet tell. I set my glass down. Of course. The annex chamber was only 20 feet away, behind a curved partition of frosted smart glass. It had probably been designed for side consultations, cooling tempers, private signatures. Tonight it felt like something else before I even crossed the threshold. Warm light. No windows. One narrow table fixed to the floor. 4 chairs on one side, one on the other. That was the first honest thing in the room. I stopped just inside. Elias shifted with me, silent as shadow, but the chamber's steward raised a hand at once. "Escort remains outside under privacy procedure." There was no escort restriction in the printed sequence, I said. There is now, Miss Reed During replied. For confidential interdelegation reconciliation. His tone made reconciliation sound surgical. For half a second I considered refusing outright. But refusal would be entered into record as obstruction, and tomorrow's mineral corridor vote was too close already. 3 swing systems were waiting for any excuse to call me unstable, inflexible, emotional. Pick the species-neutral word, and it still meant the same thing. I looked at Elias. He did not ask, did not advise. He only met my eyes once, steady and quiet. I hated how much steadiness could feel like distance when a door was about to close. It's fine, I said. The words tasted false even before the panel sealed behind me. The sound it made was soft. That was worse. A loud lock would have admitted violence. A quiet one pretended this was normal. Miss Reed During remained standing. 2 others entered with him from the dinner table, along with the reef delegate, whose damp breathing immediately thickened the air. They did not take the chair opposite mine. They spread out instead, making me turn my head to keep all of them in view. Not dinner now. Geometry. I stayed on my feet. Let us save time, Miss Reed During said. Tomorrow, you will withdraw your objection to the revised corridor inspection authority. No, his eyelids lowered a fraction. You have not heard the incentive. I heard the authority clause. The incentive arrived in a shallow ceramic dish. A server drone crossed the chamber on whispering mag rollers and lowered the plate between us with absurd gentleness, as if courtesy could soften coercion. Steam rose from dark slices of river protein, glazed in blue oil. Beside it sat a crystal vial no longer than my thumb, stoppered in gold foil. The smell reached me first, sweet mineral vapor, medicinal, expensive. Miss Reed During rested 2 fingers beside the vial. A private restoration compound, he said. Licensed only for senior delegates of high radiance worlds. Very difficult to obtain, especially in transit. I did not look at the vial. You brought me medicine to buy my vote. To preserve your future comfort, he said. Open-air underclimates are not kind to your respiratory membranes. We have all seen the data. So that was the shape of it. Not money. Not a direct threat. A gift wrapped around a weakness the room was not supposed to know in detail. The chamber felt smaller. Air recycling hissed above the suspended lights. The polished black wall behind them gave back dim reflections. My pale throat, their layered shoulders, the straight dark line of Elias Ward near the door. Motionless, hands folded behind his back, head slightly bowed, as if this were still only a dinner gone late. I let one breath out slowly. You obtained restricted medical information. Miss Reed During gave the tiny lift of his chin that passed for elegance among his people. I obtained concern. No, I said. You obtained access. A faint clicking passed between the others. Not language exactly. Approval, maybe. Maybe impatience. They had spread themselves well. One near the service alcove. One to my left. One near the sealed inner partition. A social enclosure, deniable in every report. No weapons visible. No raised voices. Just bodies placed where exits became theory. The drone had not rolled away. It waited by the table, indicator ring glowing green. I finally glanced toward Elias. Nothing changed in his face. That was what made it noticeable. He had spent the evening making himself smaller than the furniture, all restraint and quiet posture, letting alien assumptions do his work for him. But now his eyes were not on me. They were on the drone. For one strange second I thought he was studying the protocol path, wondering whether to remove it from the room. Then I saw the angle of his shoulders. The stillness had tightened. Not confusion. Measurement. Miss Reed During followed my glance and smiled without warmth. Your guard may relax. This is diplomacy, not predation. No answer came from the door. The drone moved first. A simple service correction. One smooth turned to present the dish more directly toward me. Its articulated arm extended another 3 inches. The crystal vial tipped in its cradle. The green indicator ring had gone amber. I did not understand the danger until Elias Ward was already in motion. No warning. No spoken command. One step, maybe less. The room barely registered it. A blur of dark suit crossing polished floor, silent except for the sharp rubber kiss of one shoe finding traction. His left hand caught the drone's wrist joint before the arm could finish extending. His right thumb hit the emergency seam under the service collar with exact, brutal precision. Metal cracked open. The machine died in his grip. Not powered down. Died. The articulated arm locked half-extended. The dish lifted, tilted, then froze as his wrist twisted. The vial fell free. He caught that too, out of the air, between two fingers, before it could strike the table. The whole thing took less than a breath. Ceramic slid, but did not break. Blue oil rippled once. Steam curled against his sleeve. He stood between me and the drone now, one dead machine hanging from his hand like a toy with its strings cut, the vial pinched delicately in the other, as if it were more dangerous than the metal. Nobody moved. I heard my own pulse. I heard the recycling vents. I heard one of the delegates inhale too sharply through throat slits not made for surprise. Silence has weight in a sealed chamber. It pressed against my ears hard enough to hurt. Blue oil trembled in the broken vial Elias Ward held between two fingers. The scent coming off it was sweet at first, then metallic underneath, like fruit left too long beside surgical tools. Across the table, the representative from Miss Reed during had gone pale along the thin membranes under his jaw. Not guilt. Calculation. He was already measuring distance. Witnesses, denial. Nobody wanted to be first. So open air underdid it for them. Its senior envoy leaned forward on articulated forelimbs, glassy eyes fixed on Elias Ward, and gave a slow, almost ceremonial click of mandibles. Human, it said, voice translated into perfect calm. Release the chemical and identify your level of military conditioning. The words moved through the room like a blade drawn an inch from a sheath. That was the challenge. Not an attack. Worse, a classification. If Elias Ward answered wrong, they would treat him as a hidden weapon embedded in a diplomatic suite. If he refused, they would call his silence proof. If he answered truthfully, whatever truth meant in that moment, he would pull something larger than protocol into the light. Steam still curled against his dark sleeve. A line of blue oil had touched the fabric and left no stain I could see. He looked at it once, not with fear, but with the same attention a mechanic might give a loose bolt before deciding whether the whole engine needed to come apart. Then he set the crushed drone body on the table. Metal ticked softly against polished stone. I'm not military, he said. His voice was low. No performance in it. No threat sharpened for effect. Just a fact, laid down clean. A delegate from Smiles gave a brittle laugh that died before it finished. You disabled a chamber server with one hand. I disabled a machine that tried to force a compliance agent into my principal's bloodstream. He placed the ceramic dish farther from me with the back of his wrist. That doesn't require military conditioning. It requires basic judgment. The answer should have eased them. It did not, because they had all seen the movement, seen how little it had cost him. Open air under tilted its head. Then identify the environment that produced this basic judgment. Only then did Elias Ward look fully around the chamber. At the brass-rimmed water vessels. At the layered robes, filtration collars, breathing veils, diplomatic seals. At the softly heated air tailored to 9 species and still unpleasant for most of them. At me, for one brief second, as if checking that I was steady enough to hear the rest. I was not, but I lifted my chin anyway. He understood. He always did. Earth, he said, classified by most of your shipping indexes as a high-gravity biosphere with an unstable weather profile, dense microbial load, high oxygen availability, aggressive predator history, and broad-spectrum environmental volatility. No one interrupted. He went on with the same maddening calm. I was born at 1 standard gravity. That means my skeleton formed under constant load some of your populations only experience in training centrifuges. My cardiovascular system developed to push blood uphill against that load every second of every day. My species regulates temperature by sweating, which is inefficient, ugly, and effective enough to let us run prey to death over distance. The representative from Deathworld Truth made a tiny sound through his nose. Not disbelief anymore. Recognition. Elias Ward raised the unbroken hand, palm open, as if offering them nothing more dangerous than anatomy. We heal badly compared to some of you. Slowly too. We bruise. We scar. We tear. But we stay functional longer than many species think is reasonable. Pain doesn't always stop us. Sometimes it just informs us. A faint scraping circled the table, chairs shifting back by fractions of an inch. He noticed. Of course he noticed. On my world, he said, children fall, split skin, get stitches, and go back to school. Workers break fingers and finish shifts before they learn how bad the break is. The first sound was not a shout. It was the soft magnetic click of a restraint field priming under the table. Blue light flashed in a thin ring around the base of Miss Reed During's chair. Not enough to trap. Enough to warn. Enough to tell every trained eye in the chamber that someone had just decided diplomacy had ended and procedure was now being bent into a weapon. I felt my spine lock against the backrest. No one moved at first. That made it worse. The conference chamber held its breath with us. White walls. Dark mirrored ceiling. Air scrubbers whispering overhead. The polished table reflecting every hand, every claw, every folded document case in warped silver. The emergency strips along the floor had come alive without any formal alert, washing everyone's lower bodies in a cold blue that made skin tones look sickly. Across from me, Smiles had stopped pretending to be amused. The softness had gone out of his face. The decorative fringe along his jaw lay flat now. A stress tell his aides had probably hoped I would never learn. One of them had a palm pressed beneath the table lip. Security control. Quiet. Deniable. Illegal if challenged. Effective if no one dared challenge it. I understood the move a second too late. This had never been about forcing a vote. It was about isolating me long enough to manufacture consent. A sealed room. A frightened delegation. A protective hold, explained afterward as a temporary measure during elevated tensions. No blood. No public spectacle. Just paperwork wrapped around coercion until it looked clean. I opened my mouth. Do not, Smiles had said, and for the first time there was no velvet in it. The word struck the chamber harder than if he had slammed a fist. To my left, cold arrival lowered his gaze to the table, refusing to witness what he could later deny. Open air under looked physically ill. Deathworld Truth did not look at me at all. That frightened me more than anger would have. It meant he was calculating survival. Another click sounded. A second field warmed to life behind my chair. My pulse hit so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. Not panic. Recognition. The kind that comes when a trap finishes closing and your body understands the geometry before your mind does. Then fabric shifted beside the wall. Just a whisper. Elias Ward had not reached for the weapon at his side. Had not changed stance. Had not even stepped fully away from the panel he had been standing near all through the session. Quiet as structure, forgettable by design. But he had lifted his head. That was all. Smiles had saw it and made the mistake everyone makes exactly once. He took stillness for obedience. You are under temporary chamber restriction, he said to me. Formal again, now that the machinery was speaking for him. Your bodyguard will stand down while this council clarifies your noncompliance. My mouth went dry. Elias Ward did not answer him. Instead, he looked at the glowing ring under Miss Reed During's chair, then at the half-lit seam behind my seat, then at the aide with his hidden hand under the table. Inventory first. Always inventory first. I had seen that look before planetside, when a shuttle port scanner malfunctioned and half a cargo deck had nearly vented. Other people had shouted. Elias Ward had only looked, measured, counted, chosen. The aide must have mistaken silence for hesitation, because his hand twitched. Everything after that happened so fast my memory still plays it in slices. A sharp chirp. A panel in the table edge opened 2 inches too far. Elias Ward moved. Not with the wild speed people imagine when they talk about violence. Not dramatic. Not messy. Just direct. Efficient. Terrible in how little motion it required. One step. His hand caught the table lip and used it like a pivot point. The polished surface groaned under force it had not been engineered to receive. The room stayed silent long enough for me to hear the cooling system labor inside the walls. Not one voice. Not one protest. Just that low mechanical breath and the faint electrical hiss from the restraint field still glowing under the shattered edge of the table. I did not move at first. I was still looking at Elias Ward. He had stopped exactly where he needed to stop. No farther. That was what unsettled them most, I think. Not the force. Not the speed. The control. The ambassador from Miss Reed During had gone rigid, all 4 upper fingers spread in a reflex I now understood as fear, not outrage. The delegate from Smiles that was staring at the warped metal lip of the conference table as if it had personally insulted his understanding of physics. Across from me, Deathworld Truth had lost the polished amusement he had worn for most of the summit. It had drained out of him so completely that his face looked unfinished. Elias stood between me and the active threat point with his shoulders square, one hand open at his side, the other near the narrow seam in his jacket where the diplomatic sidearm remained holstered but untouched. He was breathing a little harder. Not much, just enough for me to notice because I was looking for it. That was when I understood something I should have understood days ago. He had never been calm because he failed to grasp danger. He had been calm because he had measured it correctly. I rose slowly from my chair. The sound of the seat retracting behind my knees seemed too loud. Every eye in the chamber followed me, but none of them interrupted. A few minutes earlier, they had been willing to make me small in my own negotiation. Now they were studying the space around me as if it had become hazardous. Good, I thought. Let them. Deactivate the field, I said. No one answered. I turned my head toward cold arrival, whose attendants had all suddenly discovered deep respect for silence. Now, the restraint glow vanished with a soft, descending tone. No one missed what that meant. Whoever had arranged the field had lost the initiative. Whoever had expected me to be contained while smiling through a procedural humiliation had just watched that plan collapse under one human hand. I looked at the damaged table, then at the cluster of officials pretending not to look at one another. This summit will continue, I said, but not under concealed coercion. My voice sounded colder than I felt. Cleaner. I want the chamber scan released to all delegates. I want the restraint activation record preserved. I want the source authority attached to it before any of you leave this floor. That moved them. Not physically. Politically. I saw it in the flick of eyes, in the ripple of private calculations, in the sudden awareness that what had almost happened to me could no longer be buried under etiquette. A hidden field in a diplomatic chamber was not merely a breach. It was a confession. If one faction had been willing to trap a protected envoy during negotiations, then every promise made in this building became suspect. Deathworld truth recovered first. His species was good at surviving embarrassment by changing masks. This is regrettable, he said softly. I faced him. No, I said. Regrettable is spilled wine. This was intent. That landed harder than a shout would have. He started to answer, then stopped. Because there was nothing to stand on anymore. Not with the evidence in the room. Not with Elias beside me. Not with half the delegates suddenly wondering whether aligning against me had nearly put them on the wrong side of a human response they had not known existed. Someone near the far wall finally spoke. Open air under, voice thin with caution. The motion against Lyra Vey should be suspended pending inquiry. Suspended. A procedural word. Dry as dust. But in that moment it felt like a gate swinging open. Seconded, said Miss Reed during immediately. That surprised me more than I expected.